Today's topic is, does consumer adoption of EVs like Tesla destroy the metrics of the oil industry? This is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Thanks once again for joining us. If this is your first time on our channel, please take time to like and subscribe. If you're a repeat visitor, welcome back. Also wanted to note that the Patreon supporters are greatly appreciated. What you'll notice is that our running footage behind is actually footage of Teslas in several Asian countries, and it's the focus of our show today. So over the last, let's say, 2 months, we've had a long-running process where at least 20 of our viewers have mentioned to us that there are some excellent articles relating to the fact that consumption of fossil fuels is reduced by the increasing use of electric vehicles around the world. And there are some numbers thrown around regarding if in fact you have increased use of EVs, that increased use, let's say Tesla is selling 100,000 vehicles every 6 months, or well, actually at 400,000 per year. Every quarter, Tesla's at 100,000 vehicles. And then you add up the other EVs that are selling well. And the thought process then is that all of that consumption of EVs will eventually start destroying the consumption of oil. There's one analyst from Paribas that did a report that suggested that within 20 or so years, because of EV adoption and the use of renewables to fuel those EVs, we'll actually see oil prices in the $9 to $10 a barrel range because demand will be reduced so greatly. So we sort of have been getting this analysis on numerous occasions, and the thought process was I really liked the reports that I had seen, both written articles from journalists as well as reports that we were receiving from analysts sort of analyzing the future of oil consumption and how that affects the oil companies, et cetera. I wanted to note that we're of the mind that one of the goals of this show is to be involved in the process of transition to EVs from I guess, ICE vehicles or other types of vehicles, because we think it impacts the planet greatly. And if the goal is performance and other attributes of great cars, all of that is provided by EVs as well. But we can also sort of benefit the planet while getting our transportation done. And we think this is a pretty awesome combination. So what I wanted to sort of dive into today is the fact that blended into this whole thing is an interesting question mark, which was, why is it that China has been so focused on bringing Tesla in? One of the big early discussions is the goal is to reduce the amount of pollution that their citizenry is exposed to, and that's actually a valid analysis. The next question mark that came up was, if in fact you're reducing citizenry use of fossil fuels and the pollution associated with it, you would then want to move to EVs, and China is doing that in theory. Well, one of the things that analytically we went through is we sort of started our whole show a year and a half ago focused on the fact that when you go to Europe, there's an interesting phenomenon there. With gas prices on average of $7 a gallon in Europe, $3, let's say $2.50 a gallon in the US, and the prices are at $3.50 a gallon in China, the value proposition associated with being in Europe and driving EVs, we thought that perhaps Tesla should just move most of its operations to Europe, because if, for example, look at Norway, their primary production of electricity is from hydroelectric, so their cost basis is actually very low. So with the government supporting Tesla in a form of tax credits and free tolls for electric vehicles and all the other ways they're doing it, there's an impressive array of ways and reasons why it is that Norway's Tesla's number one market in terms of market share. It's the number one market in the world for electric vehicles. So they've really done a great job of making the transition. So our analysis was that the $8 a gallon situation in Europe would actually shift the tide favorably in Tesla's direction, as people from all these countries would decide we're going EV because we save X amount per annum on gas, and the pollution benefits to the planet are a minor part of the dialogue. So what ended up happening is that we thought that this would be unlimited demand situation results when it came to Europe. And it actually turns out that, yes, the gas prices are high in Europe, but the problem with Tesla is that the taxes associated with new vehicles make it brutally difficult for the average consumer to afford an EV of the caliber of Tesla. So what you end up with then is, once a car, the Tesla vehicles entering Europe, especially prior to the Model 3, you're basically looking at a $50,000 or $60,000 car in the United States, and after taxes and new purchase taxes, et cetera, your net number ends up being $80,000 to $100,000 on the low end for European buyers. And then obviously, as the higher line models are seen, you're seeing a $200,000 to $250,000 vehicle by the time a European buyer buys a top of the line Tesla. So as we all know, the transition to EVs is made difficult by high prices. And that's why Tesla's been so focused on trying to figure out the 35K model, because once you get down to that price point area, the number of people that can afford it everywhere in the world increases dramatically. So we were kind of intrigued by, there's a question out there is, well, what is Tesla's demand like? Michael and some of our other friends have sort of asked about that. And the answer is that there are ways that the Europeans in particular are trying to juice demand, and that is by offering tariffs or fees to those that don't have EVs or electric vehicles in their lineups. And they're trying to provide other incentives to somewhat make up for the handicap that's associated with a transition to EVs, in particular the cost. So what this all brings up is, and why are we having this conversation about China being the fulcrum of demand for Tesla going forward? And the answer to that is that from what we can figure out, we had a kind of a meeting with a recent arriving student to the United States, and we talked with him about what's going on with electric vehicles and ICE vehicles in China. And one interesting point that he made was, China is a very interesting place because it turns out that China is one of the largest producers of coal in the world, but produces very little oil. So they've kind of run into this problem where they don't deliver, in the case of oil, if they can use coal to produce electricity, they can produce the electricity very cheaply because their cost basis is just the cost of digging out of the mountains. They don't have to buy the coal from anyone, as they do in the case of oil. So basically, our argument on the marginal utility of Tesla was related to the price of gas. So in theory, Europe's gas price is about $8 a gallon. So in theory, they should have a huge amount of demand for Tesla's cars, which is actually, there's a lot of demand there, but it's muted by the fact that the taxes are so brutal. So I bring this up because the the question was, why is China so hot and heavy for Tesla in every way? And the way we can calculate it is that um, Tesla helps facilitates China move away from oil consumption. Number one, what we saw number-wise is that China has become one of the largest renewable energy sort of producers in the world, be it hydroelectric power or solar panels or other methods in that regard. So what this results in then is China is really trying to regain control of itself by shifting to, renewables and coal. But if they can shift people onto electric power, they can then perhaps build more dams and go crazy with solar panels as a way to increase their EV usage and therefore actually control their overall costs. So one of the reports we read related to oil consumption in the world, and it turns out that evidently I want to say each year, I actually saw something that said there's like a 1,000,000 barrel a day increase in demand for oil that goes on globally, but I'm hoping that it's maybe 1 million extra barrels per month that's in demand, but that number obviously could be greater than that. The general point that was made was that there's an issue going on, which is that while the first world, be it the United States or Europe, is heavily moving towards um, things like solar panels and electricity generated by wind and other sources, it turns out that that decrease in demand for oil is actually flowing into places like India and China, where more consumers are getting the resources necessary to purchase vehicles. And so it turns out with the growth of population in general, as well as the growth of demand from, if you will, high polluting countries like China and Asia, you're not really seeing that much of a decrease. Remember, the global population increases at 2% per year. So while we may be seeing increased use of EVs as well as renewables in some places, it's not a universal phenomenon, and that's affecting the global impacts that EVs might have. So we're inclined to sort of keep an eye on this, root for more of this to be done, because the less pollution that comes from EVs and the more use of renewables and other techniques to produce electricity and therefore use electric vehicles, for example, to execute this, I think the better off we are. So the question comes up then is, where are we at for demand for Tesla vehicles, and therefore we can have some idea of where are the numbers going for Tesla over time. The answer that comes up for this is that in the case of China, as we've discussed on numerous occasions, China is about a 1 million, 1.5 million per annum consumer of electric vehicles currently. Their current goal is to have this number actually jump up to 7 million vehicles a year by 2025. And so there's a whole bunch of techniques they've installed with the goal being of getting to that number. The variety includes no taxes on electric vehicles. Electric vehicles can drive every day of the week in and out of cities without the 1 day per week restrictions that ICE vehicles have. And they keep piling on. When you buy an electric vehicle, up until this time next year, when we're in September, they have as much as a $10,000 tax credit that goes with the vehicle. So this is another reason why it's a good idea for Tesla to get its China plant going quickly, because you have a higher likelihood that you end up with Tesla benefiting in the number of vehicles sold by being around for the early tax credits that are being made available by the Chinese government. So it's an interesting set of points, but basically what's happening right now is that based on the number of vehicles that can be produced and at the highest quality, there's kind of unlimited demand right now when it comes to ICE vehicles, vehicles like Tesla in a place like China. So as we've said on numerous occasions, it's our feeling is until a new battery comes to really mess up Tesla's control of the marketplace, we think that it's possible Tesla could even take 50% market share within a year in China, and that number actually might rise to, higher than that. But that as others, including China, close in on Tesla's battery capabilities, you now end up with this sort of demand advantage that Tesla has declining as you have competitors enter the space with vehicles that are comparable. So our overall thing is that we love the articles you guys have been sending us related to new developments and how EVs are big time affecting demand for oil, and therefore as that demand is lowered and we switch to renewables, we now end up with increased oil or decreased oil demand, increased renewables, and we basically end up with a Tesla impacting greatly what happens on the planet. And in theory, when Tesla gets to 1 million vehicles a year and others are climbing into the same boat, we have further sort of arrival at the destination of better uses of the planet's resources to actually have a great symbiotic outcome. So I'm actually looking forward to you guys' comments regarding this story. Like I said, we've seen at least 10 sort of posts or attempted posts by folks that wanted to get my opinion on it. I think it's exciting to see EVs transition people out of oil and into use of electricity generated by renewable resources, even, for example, people's homes. But at this point, it's happening, but nothing on the scale that we'd like to see it happening. But we do believe that places like China seem really focused on how they can make this transition and handle their own pollution needs by making a strong move into the renewable energy space / solar panels, even if the first step is to move people onto electricity that's mostly powered by coal. I believe the number I saw was in 2015, 72% of Chinese electricity was generated by coal. And in 2019, that number is down to 70%. But this shows the increasing size of their population, even though they're putting a lot of resources into renewable energy as a reduction of pollution goal. It's sort of baby steps. But I think that, the future looks good because they're focused on it and they're spending a lot of money to move the needle in this regard. So I think China is a fascinating place because you could argue that because they're having to sort of generate the demand based on all kinds of tax credits, et cetera, and new rules, you could argue that maybe it's a fake demand situation relative to the increased demand that Tesla represents. But it's demand nonetheless, and we think it's awesome that this is happening, and hopefully we don't see them stopping in this process. The next thing we wanted to sort of dive into briefly is the Porsche Taycan just came to market. And it's interesting because we saw a whole bunch of numbers that suggested that this vehicle was going to come out and not even be able to perform as well as the Model 3, even though you're paying $150,000 per car. And it turns out that they're actually turning in some excellent numbers. The top of the line Model S performance is showing 2.4 seconds, 0 to 60 times. And in the case of the Taycan, it's turning in a 2.6 second time for their $150,000 car. This is pretty awesome. Other specs that they've thrown out include the fact that they actually have an ability to do 15 to 18 minutes recharge issue. There's a number of impressive, better than we've seen from everyone statistics going on. I'm actually eager to find out, are they using the Tesla design type battery, or are they still using the pouch? Because it'll tell us what the wear and tear on the battery packs might be and whether or not there'll be longevity there for the owners of those vehicles over time. And we think that they've been probably running these cars hard for months, if not a year, to make sure they can anticipate, where the brakes are going to be as they start to distribute them or sell them to customers around the world. So congratulations to Porsche, VW. I have to admit that, there are a lot of points one could make about this car and what's happening. What I'm really looking forward to with this car is that Porsche is part of the VW group, and VW is doing everything from low-end EVs all the way up to supercars. And $150,000 Porsche seems like a decent sized number. What I think would be kind of cool is when VW slash Audi slash Porsche decides under their Lamborghini brand to deliver a $500,000 Lamborghini, riding the same platform as the Porsche, but now they have more cash to work with to deliver on sort of supercar performance and aspects with the extra cash. So while I think the Taycan is a good car, it's impressive in many ways, it's still in the performance realm that it can be eaten up by a four-door sedan, even though it's a two-door that should destroy, most, if not all, four doors. And so once we have that Lamborghini version of this, platform of EV, I just think that we end up with a supercar that causes all the manufacturers to have to ship over to electric and therefore have more of an impact. The electric sort of transition has more of an impact on everyone involved. So, any rate, congrats again to Porsche, Audi. Great statistics, both performance, charge time, range is a little bit light, but all those numbers are way better than where they were 1, 2, 3 years ago, and it suggests that they're serious about making progress here. This also sort of dives a little bit into what is Tesla doing currently and how should they manage the competitive advantage they have. And my answer to that is that it really emphasizes the point that Tesla doesn't have an unlimited amount of time before competitors offer legitimate options. So the process of making sure they push vehicles out that hit each market segment and keep reducing costs in the process, and hence the Chinese move, I think is a smart move, and it may hurt how good the earnings numbers look like in the short term, but I think it allows Tesla to establish a nice base of customers and customer relationships over time. I've wanted to do a talk on the whole shift that Tesla's made into insurance. I think it's great that they are going to have a new revenue stream, but it feels to me like it's a mixed blessing. Right now, Tesla is running lean on people and cash, so their tendency is to understaff, and therefore it affects the degree of quality of customer service they're able to provide. So while it's a great idea because they make more money and they can get parts for their cars better than others, and they can use the data on customers to determine how to price their insurance better than others to make money, I'm a little concerned because I don't want the transition into a new line of business that they're not experts at to potentially jeopardize the brand by delivering poor quality stuff that, I'm nearing the end of the show, and I've been sort of catching up with some of your comments to not reduce what else I'm doing. Some great comments there. You guys can all see them, and I'm going to refrain from diving in now. And I think what I'm going to do is go ahead and go in and copy those comments, post them, and try to, respond at the end of the show, because there are a lot of people, probably about 100 to 200 of our viewers are on a live feed, and then the rest of the folks tend to sort of catch up with us after hours. And so it'd be nice to have more than just 100 folks involved in the responses to comments you guys have been making. Any rate, definitely enjoyed reviewing some of the latest developments on what's going on with Tesla. Yes, I do see oil consumption impacted by the transition to EVs. We'd love for it to be greater than it is currently, but it's a start, And as we see growth in the number of vehicles Tesla is putting out in the marketplace, I think it'll continue to be making a difference, and we're looking forward to that difference. Very much looking forward to all of your comments afterwards. Please take time to like and subscribe. Patreon support would be greatly appreciated. And we also like suggestions that you guys have of topics we should cover. It definitely affects what we choose to cover, etc. This is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Thanks once again for joining us. Tschüss German, au revoir French, lehitrot, Hebrew, Hoda Hafez, Farsi, Tsrazviche, Russian, Ni hao ma, Chinese, and in Jamaica we say enough respect wa goodman. So all of you would like me to introduce my ending in your language as well, please feel free to leave a note, with what the greeting is, and I can look it up to make sure it's not a curse word and I get in trouble. And then I can work to integrate that in as I learn how to pronounce as well, because we definitely like to keep learning and growing. Remember, 25 leg lifts on each leg before you get into the day today. Don't go to bed within 4 hours of eating, preferably 4 hours, but 2 hours if you can, so the food digests. And we look forward to our next conversation. Have a great day, and bye for now.